So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chris. I was asked to give a talk for this event a few months ago, and I thought it would be good to pair the very work productionizing talk that John gave with a more fun talk about a project that I worked on and off for a couple of years. I yeah, so about me, I'm Curtis. I grew up in Michigan in the US, and I've been in Givery for almost 2.5 years. I've been to Japan for not quite into 3.5 years. At Givery, it's mostly been Stella, a little bit of TypeScript, and a very little bit of some other languages. And today, my talk is about a fun math project that was a side project that I've been working on basically since coming originally to Japan 3 years ago. And I wanted to talk about it because it's a fun mix of some fun sources of data that you might also find inspiring you to your own side projects or potentially, I guess, projects at work. It also has some classic CS algorithms that you normally get taught in school and then never actually use. Maps, which I think maps on their own are somewhat interesting, although unfortunately didn't have enough time to go into a lot of detail on that. And trains, which I think is one of the things that makes light in Tokyo so nice and pretty. So, Tokyo has a lot of trains. You've probably seen these kinds of diagrams before. This is just Tokyo. This is not Japan or anything. There's I don't know, 15 train operators, something like that, more than 100 lines of trains in Tokyo. And, this is a really good thing because it is so much of the reason why Tokyo it's nice. It's so much of the reason why it's easy to get to places like, someone else's office and after the workday. But it does make planning your commute, especially if you're choosing where to live, where you might also have other constraints like price and being close to school or family or friends. And so normally a map makes gauging the distance to a place easy. That's not the same as the commute time. So an example is living down there and going up there. Those are both in Senegai Ward. And the actual distance is the wrong side of the triangle. You have to go on both sides instead of going just straight up. And there's a lot of places that like this in Tokyo because while there's a lot of trains and they are very fast, that means that you don't line up with one of the really fast trains. It's not a really fast meet. And so we want to somehow show visually a way to let us to see this kind of issue on the map. Oh yeah, again, if you're trying to balance two people's commutes at the same time, it is really hard to track all of this complexity. And so I originally started this project when I wanted to solve this problem when I was looking for a place to move. And I finished it 2 years after that. So it did helping me, but hopefully it will help the next time I need to move. The question was if I want a 30-minute commute to my office, or I just more realistically a 45-minute commute. And also my partner wants a 45-minute commute. Where does that exist within Tokyo? How far out can we get? So that the rent is cheaper on over. Yeah, and what kinds of areas? And so how do we visualize time on a map? And so the classic answer to this is called Isochrone Maps, which is a visualization that may not have heard of because they're quite uncommon. So iso is from the Greek same, and chron comes from chrono, which means time. And so they visualize places that it takes the same amount of time to get to. So this is supposedly the oldest published example of an isochrone map from 1881, which showed the number of days that it took to reach different places in the world traveling from London. So you can see all of Europe is this green, which is the only place that's close to London if you have to travel by boat before 1800. And you can see the ISO meaning all of these orange regions are the most remote places from London. As you can see, all of them are the same color because all of these are equally very difficult to get to. And so what I wanted is a map that is like this, but obviously just Tokyo. And instead of measuring days, measuring tens of minutes. And so first I wanted to look, has anyone else already done this for Tokyo? And it seemed from what I could tell, the answer is no. if you search Tokyo Isochrone Transit Map, you'll find things like this. So like this is I actually found this today. I didn't find these before, but it's a walking isochrone map. So these little blobs are around each of the 1,000 or so train stations in Tokyo, and it shows how much of Tokyo is within a 15-minute walk of a train station. And so this is useful, but it doesn't actually help with your commute. It just tells you you're close to a train station, not a useful train station. And there's a couple of sites like this f.traveltime.com, which says it's a transit isochrone there. But if you look at this is I think a 15-minute commute. And so it says like you cannot get into Tokyo. And the reason for this, I can go into more details later. A lot of the train operators don't publish their train schedules in a computer readable way. And so if you look up most of these sites that claim to be transit isochrone maps, they actually only have basically the subways, because those are publicly operated, at least partially. And so the publicly operated subways do publish computer readable versions of route schedules, but basically none of the private operators do. And so this is the gap that I wanted to fill. And so I made my own. This is just a screenshot of showing the result. I wonder if I can get this. Maybe. I'll go back to that. So this is the result. This shows what I think 50-minute or so, maybe 45-minute commute from like the Givery office looks like. So all of these areas are places that if you wanted a 45-minute commute here, including walking, including waiting, including transferring, that's where you could do it. And you can really appreciate just how extensive the Tokyo train network is by seeing how far out that is. It covers essentially the entirety of the like 23 wards, and so good to see that. So, place. Yeah, and some of the technical details. I used MapLibreGL. This is an open source reimplementation of Mapbox, which exists basically because Mapbox made a really nice map viewer, and then they suddenly made it not open source, and so people got mad and made their own that's API compatible, but completely open source. OpenStreetMap for the actual map data, which I will talk a bit more about. Train data ultimately comes from Kotsu Shimbuncha, because that's where all train data comes from, and that's something I learned from this. And Wikidata for some additional train information data, which I'll also talk about. I also just like this map because it lets you see the amount that trains permeate the fabric in Tokyo. So like the left is all of the places that are within a 5-minute walk from a train station. The right is a 10-minute walk. You can see that, it's essentially everywhere. And I think actually what's more interesting is that there are hardy little like train deserts in the middle of Tokyo, where you actually can suddenly be more than a 10-minute walk from a station. Yeah, so I think it's just also an interesting tool to play around with. And yeah, so visualizing times. So the goal of this is to create a map that visualizes time. So the way that we do that is near parts are shaded, light, dark parts. The further to get to, and it's a little hard to see maybe, but there are these dashed lines, and these show milestones. I believe this is every 20 minutes. You see a dashed line, so you can see this is essentially within walking distance of the office, and then this larger gap is the next chunk out. And so this is a very, very complicated like region that's been blotted onto the map. So now I'm going to talk about the algorithm that I used to compute this. And so the most obvious way to start looking at any problem is usually brute force. So we could just think, okay, imagine we could compute the distance to like every single pixel on this map. And so now we break it into the pixels that are less than 40 minutes. We make white. The pixels that are more than 40 minutes, we make gray. So would that work? Yeah, but you would get these really jagged edges, which is a problem because if you want to zoom in, you want nice clean data that's going to zoom with the viewport. So we want vector data, and ideally it's not this super jagged vector data. Let's write down. It's also way too slow. Like this picture that I showed before is 1 million pixels, and so we cannot afford to do 1 million pathfinding requests every time you like want to move the little pointer, and so that is just not going to work. So instead, we're going to focus on the isolines, which they're the lines of points that have a particular commute time. which is like the big black line and also these dashed lines. And since there's only a tiny sliver of the map is those isolines, it's a lot less data that we have to calculate. And it also means that we can try to come up with a formula that is used to define it. And hopefully that has a nice formula to solve. And so I wanted to show the way that I approach this kind of problem solving is often this like algebra, but using pictures. So instead of having just variables, I like to make it feel a little more friendly. So like we have an isoline, which is associated with some time, and we want to solve this equation. And so we don't need to be super precise about what we mean, but basically the distance between like home and some points, you want to find all of these points that we can get to. And we know that we have this like time equation that says the way that we get to a point is by walking to a train station, taking the train, and then walking to the point. Okay, so now let's use algebra to solve this. So the first thing that we note is we can break down the commute into parts. So we can skip and ignore this part and just say, okay, what is the time to get from home to some station, and then the time to get from that station to the point we're interested in. And then we can do some rearranging of algebra, subtracting things over. And so now we have this much simpler format where we have the unknown on one side, and we have, this is a constant, because this is a constant, and the time to the station is, we don't know it yet, but that is also a constant. There's one amount of time you need to get to each station. And so now we can also zoom in to this a little bit, because we see the time between the exit station, or the arrival station, and where we want to go ultimately. We're just going to walk along. And so we can make this really simple and surprisingly accurate approximation. We're just divide the distance by the walk speed, because the definition of speed is distance over time. And so, yeah, we can just approximate this. And if we plug that approximation back in, we get this even simpler form where we just have constant minus constant times constant is the distance. And so if we're talking about all of the points that are the same distance away from z, that's just a circle. So we have z in the center, and we have our circle of radius distance. And then we have this unknown other time variable that we need to include. And so, yeah, I like this kind of problem solving because you use like the algebraic rigorous tools that we learn in school, but if you write in this more approachable way instead of like trying to hit crazy square roots and things, that it actually makes it very easy to understand. It's harder. And so, yeah, again, the solution is just a circle. And so this leads to like the basic algorithm that we're going to use for finding the isolines, which is find the train stations, measure the travel time to all of the train stations somehow, and then draw a circle around them if it's the required size, and then merge them all together somehow. So this is the heavy lifting part of this algorithm, which is how do we know how far away each train station is? And so ultimately, this is going to come from train timetables. And so the very simplest case is actually not that simple, because some stations are skipped by some trains, and some trains come much more frequently than others. Some trains branch and go in different directions. And so we really need to hone in on one specific question, which is from one station to another station on the same train line. Let's look at just the trains and just use those and try to boil it down to a single number. What does it mean? How long are we going to have to wait? And so the way that I decided to measure this is the average wait and travel time, which I'll explain in a little more detail, which is assume, like this is on the left, we have the time of the departure, and the right, we have the time of the arrival. And assume we're going to arrive at the station at a random time between 10 and 11. So we're not very good planning. We just get up sometime, like our alarm clock is unreliable. It's plus or minus 1 hour. And so we arrive at the station, and we're going to try to take the train that gets us there quickest. So for example, there's no reason to take the 4 departure because the express that comes 5 minutes later actually rocks first. And so the first thing that we could do is we can cross out all of those slower trains because they're beaten by later train. And then we can break it down into, for each time interval, which train are we going to take? How long do we have to wait? And how long is the travel time going to? Where there's some special edge cases like, oh, at the end of the hour, you might actually have to wait at most a certain amount of extra time. So all of those subtleties in every step of this, which is why it's also, when you're doing problem solving, to break things down into very small problems. But this basically becomes a arithmetic problem. And so like for this timetable, we would say distance is 24.8 minutes. And the meaning of that is if you arrive at a random time between 10 and 11, on average, you will be at your destination 24.8 minutes before, assuming you take the best bus betray. Okay, so this is the solution for just taking, if you live inside of a train station and you want to get to one other train station directly connected to it, we had solved the problem. But the real world, you have to transfer. There's lots of train stations, and also sometimes you have to walk between train stations. Also, if you don't live inside the train station, you have to walk to the train station next to you. And so we have all of these are still unknown, but we do know the length of each of these individual rail sections. And so what we have is a graph. The nodes are the train stations. The edges are the train lines and also sometimes walking. And so we already can calculate the length of each of these segments because we have walking. We're just going to use our simple speed formula. And for train lines, we use the complicated model from before. And Dijkstra's algorithm helpfully tells us the shortest path from our home train station to every other train station. And so we're going to use Dijkstra's algorithm. You can look that up, or you can ask ChatGPT because it knows that there's no point repeating how that works. And then finally, the niche trick that I like is we can use the same pathfinding, the same Dijkstra's algorithm to also turn our overlapping circles into simple polygons. So we end up with a bunch of circles that look like this. They intersect in a bunch of points, and so that's not going to render right if we just leave it. So we need to calculate intersections. There's a simple formula for that. Then we break them up into their arcs and draw all the arcs that are inside of other circles. And now we can just apply our normal pathfinding algorithm because it doesn't actually matter. There's only one way to go around. So it doesn't matter which direction we go. We just pick a direction and then we visit every single point, and that's all of the polygons. And so, yeah, there's two uses of graph search in my implementation, which was just opposite. And there are better ways to do this. I just wanted to be the laziest programmer possible and reuse the function that I wrote back, even though it's not the most appropriate way to do this. And so doing this project, it took a long time for me to actually go from having this idea to actually having a working solution. And so I use a lot of fun data sources, and I want to highlight some of them. So Wikidata is something that I think most people have never heard of. It's run also under the Wikimedia Foundation umbrella. And it's Wikipedia, but everything is arranged as a table, like a database table. And so people can contribute the values, and the values also have citations, just like they do in Wikipedia. So you can actually check each of these things. And they also have a query language that looks kind of like SQL, where you can just ask questions. And so, for example, here's like the Hanzomon line is one of the lines that runs through Shibuya. And they have all this data, include the logo. And so I use this to download all of the train logos. And so, although they don't actually appear in the current version of the thing on my website, it does know that logo and color for all of the train lines. But it's loaded in the background and just not what you say. And then train data. Of course, train data is critical. So there is a project that's sponsored by the government, and they have somehow corralled all of the private operators in Tokyo to contribute to it. They run contests, I think about once a year, where they will temporarily give usually real-time access to all the train information and all of us information to everybody. But unfortunately, it expires access, so I never actually signed up in time to get access to that data. But there are some projects that you find online, like this really cool Me Tokyo 3D, which has a 3D map of where all the trains currently are in Tokyo. I don't know if it's actually live data or if it's just historical data, because this project is like 4 years old at this point, I think. But so this is something that exists, and it would be cool for you to be able to use in the future. But so in practice, there's a company called Kotsu Shimbun which they publish print manuals of all of the train departures in all of Japan, not just Tokyo. And they also sell apps. And it turns out that they're actually the people who made Yahoo Transits, Navitimes, Ekitans, Jordan's, Google Maps. All of them are buying their train departure data from Kotushingu. And so I needed to get this data. They do not sell it to individuals. The pricing starts something like $2,000 a month. So I could not get it from them except by scraping and estimating. Because luckily, all of these sites, they have the same structure because they're made by the same company and are all plain HTML because they don't want to expose a big guy. But because it's plain HTML, it's server rendered, it's also really easy to parse. And so, yeah, you can scrape and then estimate all of the details about like dwell time and travel speed, and that's what I ended up doing. And it turns out the trains in Tokyo are so frequent, it doesn't really matter that this isn't perfect because trains aren't generally timed, so you have to make a particular transfer to get a good time. And yeah, normally if you're a minute or two late, another train's coming. So anyway, this might not work in other cities, but it works pretty well to get. And finally, OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is, I think, even less well-known, possibly. It's like Google Maps, but it's contributed to like a wiki. So anyone can contribute data and has a lot of really detailed information. Like you can ask it, where is every vending machine in Japan? And there are a lot of people who are obsessed with OpenStreetMap, especially in Tokyo. So the data tends to be very complete about certain things. Business information like train schedules itself is not in there normally because they don't flag information that gets stale. But like the train lines themselves, because they don't move, are in there. Even proposed and historical train lines are in this. And they also have an API where you can download lots of data. So I also done this for getting like the information about where train stations are. And yeah, I'm over time, but maps in general are fun. They're also really involved. Like this is some official model of the Earth for the purpose of coordinates with the ice extremely exaggerated. And no, this, of course, you've probably heard of all these map projections, which again doesn't matter for a map of just Tokyo. And you can also do really fun things. So there's a lot of companies that combine art and the technology by tapping. And I think that's really beautiful what the people do to using these open sources of data, because OpenStreetMap, again, makes a lot of these things possible, because otherwise map data tends to be pretty tightly held. And so I'm very thankful that so many people are willing to put work into making maps accessible so that I can do this kind of project. Yeah, so thank you. That's my project.